Today's episode is for you if you've achieved all the things on paper and something essential is still missing. You've been through something that cracked your life wide open and you're figuring out what to do with what you see now. Today's episode is for you if you're ready for your biggest life, but you don't know where to start.
Thanks for joining us today at the Healing Medicine Podcast. Who are you listening to? I am Dr. Jessie Mahoney, and my co-host is Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang. We are two board-certified physicians who bring decades of experience to the conversation about wellness. If you crave more ease and aspire to rediscover your love for medicine and life, one mindful step at a time, you are in the right place. We hope you'll love today's episode, and if so, please share it. A reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice. Welcome to There Are No Shortcuts to a Life Well Lived. There is a line that I come back to all the time in my retreats and coaching, and it comes from a fantastic book that I highly recommend by Enya Oakes. It's called 108 Notes from a Studio in Oakland. And if you go back about a year in our podcast, you will find Enya on the podcast in episode 261, and she talks about the book. There is a phrase in the book, and the book is a series of 108 notes / blogs. And there's a phrase in one of them that says, "There are no shortcuts to a big life. There are many shortcuts to a life that looks big on the outside, but is killing you on the inside." And so that is the inspiration for this podcast, because many women physicians and many people in general are living a life that might look big on the outside. They're successful on the outside, but they are struggling on the inside, or it's out of alignment. It's impacting sometimes their health, it's impacting their happiness, it's impacting their relationships, and they may or may not be aware of how heavy the internal weight is. So this concept is something that I try to help people put into practice. And this idea that there are no shortcuts to a big life, I thought deserved a full conversation. So Ni-Cheng and I, who I believe are both committed to living the biggest, fullest possible version of this one wild and precious life. I'm going to put all the things in there. This is what we try to do. And so we thought we'd share our experience and our learnings along the way.
This is a bit timely, Jessie, because this is a little bit of a retrospective. And unless you set an intention and some time and space to actually reflect back, oftentimes it doesn't happen. So thank you for inviting me to share some of my reflections after almost 47 years of being on this good earth. And incidentally, we are coming up on my 15th cancerversary. So I define cancerversary as a day of diagnosis. And that date is May 16th. So that's going to be 15 years from my day of diagnosis of breast cancer. And that was the one big event that cracked my life open at age 31. And as you had previously described, I was a very successful, very hardworking pulmonary critical care fellow. I had already done research. I was engaged very much so in my clinical training. I had a newborn at home. It seemed like I was ticking off all of the success boxes, if you will. But honestly, I was going 200 miles an hour and my body had to stop me in its tracks. And it basically told me if I continued the way that I was going with the lack of sleep, the lack of good nutrition, all the unhealthy things, and the things I wasn't doing to take care of myself, it would literally put me in the ground. And so having had cancer at such a young age with such a young child really shifted everything. Not necessarily by choice, it was much more by necessity and wanting to maximize my lifespan, not only because of myself, but because I had such a young child at home as well. So, in doing so, I've kind of split my life up into BC and AD, just like I've labeled my children BC and AD. So, BC being before cancer, it's my eldest, who is now 16. Oh my goodness. And AD after diagnosis, my child that was conceived after having breast cancer at age 31.
I have a question about that. Your kids, by the way, your BC kid and your AD child have very different personalities and approaches to life as well. And it's fascinating, right?
Yes. And part of it, I attribute to the way I was when they were in utero. Mm-hmm. My BC child is very much like me academically. There's a perfectionism, probably because I was pregnant with her during training, for instance, and there was high levels of stress and anxiety and perfectionism in my life at that time versus my AD child, where I had a much more established mindfulness practice. And there was a lot of meditative movement incorporated. Like I had a much more robust yoga practice also with my AD child. And I think that honestly, their personalities now reflect that type of
I just had that epiphany as you were talking.
Biochemical milieu that they were swimming around in utero.
Your youngest also has just that lovely light butterfly ephemeral edge, which I also associate with you. When you're in the light, happy state, you always have, you have your shiny Berkeys at the retreats. And I think you were a butterfly for something that I was at, or one of the Brave Enough conferences, you had an outfit that was kind of inspired by that. And I think of your youngest with that same air about her.
I could see that definitely about her.
From afar, but it just struck me as such an important point when you said it.
Yeah, I mean the before cancer me and the after diagnosis me definitely is reflective in my children. And now I am much more attuned to my priorities and doing more of what I want to do and what makes me happy, as opposed to what other people think I should do. Granted, I'm still a recovering perfectionist and people pleaser. I will fully admit that. And it's a lifelong process, along with my journey with life and self-compassion.
And so my journey to this living the biggest, most full life, I didn't have one catalytic event like you had, but as I reflect on it, I actually had many. I had many pretty significant health complications along the way, but it wasn't like, even when I ended up in the ICU, it wasn't enough for me to totally change things. So as I see it, in my case, it was this gradual building of messages, different messages, that gave me the courage and gave me different skills along the way. So I'm going to start my story about 10 years ago, which was actually after most of those health complications. And it's funny because I'm about 10 years older than you are now. But it feels like the part to start the story, which is that about 10 years ago, I had done all the things as I saw it. So I was in my late 40s. And, I had been to an Ivy League college. I had my medical degree. I had a big, busy practice. I had a whole bunch of leadership roles, kept trying new ones. I was kind of a leadership junkie. And I was married and I had my 3 kids and a dog and a house, and I had been checking boxes. And I still wasn't satisfied. And I hear this a lot. And I wouldn't say it was like there was something wrong with me. I just had this like itchiness underneath that I just couldn't explain. And that's actually how I ended up in coaching, was the itchiness. And I really had a hard time justifying it to myself. Like, well, if everything isn't collapsing around me, and point of fact, it took my husband collapsing around me for me to really justify it. But I had already been dipping a toe in for a while. But from there to where I am now, was absolutely not skipping the steps. There were no shortcuts whatsoever. And if you want to hear more about the story, I actually encourage you, maybe listen to my TED Talk. It's the very shortest version. It's 12 minutes. It's called What Would Love Do? The Question We're Not Asking. And that will give you the story of those 10 years for the most part. But the part that's not in the TED Talk, and what I want to talk about today in this podcast, is really the how of getting from one to the other. And for me, the how involved growing a mindfulness practice, why this podcast exists, and getting a lot of coaching and becoming a coach and figuring out how to weave that coaching and mindfulness and nervous system work all together. And there was no shortcut to that. There was a lot of trial and error and figuring it out, and zillions and millions of uncomfortable moments. And I think many of us think, well, I don't want to do all those uncomfortable moments. And I will just offer that you're already uncomfortable if you are thinking that there's something here that you're missing out on, and that the ultimate result is worth it. So what I recognized about 10 years ago is that if you don't take control of who you're becoming, then circumstances decide for you. I do want to offer that for so many of us, of course, this happens because you have gone through all those boxes I mentioned, and it is extremely reasonable to prioritize your family and prioritize building your practice and finishing those things and having a place to live and doing all of those things. And so it's very reasonable that you get off track of wherever you might be headed, or even have stopped listening to those internal cues because there's so much external distraction. So most of us are just following this, I'll call it maybe a script or messaging that came from medical training, from our family, from the culture of our country, society, medicine, the world. And then one day we wake up and we think, how did I get here? And I hear this all the time from people. It's like, I'm not really sure how I got here. I'm not really sure what I like anymore. I'm not really sure what's me. And sometimes it comes from a place of where we have maybe caused ourselves harm or a catastrophic health thing. And so what I want to point out here is that who you become doesn't have to be a matter of fate. It doesn't have to be a matter of your cultural upbringing. You can choose it at any point. And I also want to point out it's not too late, because I was Ni-Cheng's age when I chose it. But to be fair, I chose all the other things before, and I want to own that and own that we can't become whoever we're becoming if we throw out all the other stuff. All of that stuff actually came with me and was an important part of my journey. So it's not like I woke up one day and changed everything. And Ni-Cheng didn't either, right? She brought her medical training and her degree and all of those things with her. Even the before cancer child came with her, right? It all comes with you no matter what. And you can choose how you want to move forward. And until I dove into this work, I didn't recognize that every choice I was making was either moving toward or away from the person I wanted to become. And most of us don't realize that we've been already choosing all along, but we've been kind of choosing without choosing. We're just letting the choices happen to us. And that's actually a choice, to not choose. And so for me, that was a huge revelation that all of a sudden I could choose. And there were tools, like we talked about in the previous episode, that help you have clarity and make choices.
So for me, before cancer, which was basically like my body choosing for me what I needed to do next, what I had been doing was working until the work was done, regardless of the impact on my health, regardless of whether or not I was going over duty hour restrictions. Like, I knew I wanted to stay until the work was done in the ICU or on the wards, regardless. Like there was not a question about that. That was the commitment that I had made to my own work at that time, being a medical trainee. There was a lot of time scarcity. I felt like I was always under a time crunch. There wasn't enough hours in the day to do all the things. Also, I was what I like to call future living. So it was always like, okay, I checked off that box. What's next? What's next? What's next? And there was also at the same time, because I was a trainee and I was getting graded on how well I quote unquote performed on these different clinical rotations, this constant need to prove my worth. I would worry a lot about potential mistakes and things that I had missed, as well as other people's opinions. And frankly, now at almost age 47, I still notice when those old habits that have been conditioned and ingrained in me for decades, they still creep up a bit. But I am very proud to say that I really don't have time for all of those things anymore. Like I choose to spend my energy currency doing the things that I love to do, spending my time with people that I want to spend with rather than all of those other things.
And my story is a little bit different because I came to these realizations actually as an attending. So I wasn't a perfectionist as an attending, and I actually worked 80% time. And I had a number of leadership roles, so I wasn't in clinic all the time. I had a practice that I liked in an organization that actually was pretty darn forward thinking about physician wellness. Okay. And I liked pediatrics. I liked my chosen specialty. I was good at it. It wasn't that I was drowning. It wasn't that I was sacrificing time with my family. It wasn't that I was a perfectionist. It wasn't that I was drowning in charts. But I also wasn't living in an aligned space. I had this very clear, deep inner knowing that I was out of alignment and I had something else, I don't know, bigger, better, different, whatever it is to bring to the world. And that inner knowing just kept like knocking at my brain and it kept bothering me. And if anything, and I think that I feel badly saying this, but I was bored. And I've heard other people say that they feel terrible saying they were bored. And it's not that the work was boring. It just didn't make me feel alive, right? I was doing it and I could do it and I had kind of mastered it, as we say. And so then it was like, well, what do I do? So I kept choosing different leadership roles, which would give me a challenge for a while. But then it became this serial, okay, what am I going to do next to challenge me? I actually changed facilities to change up my practice to have a different patient population, which was a challenge for a while. I opened a new medical facility, which was absolutely a challenge. But what I began to notice is that I just kept looking for the next challenge and the next challenge. And I didn't know how to be satisfied. So part of the problem was that I hadn't done coaching and I hadn't done mindfulness. And so no matter what I did, I was never going to be satisfied. And I actually did all of that before I made a change. So I grew the ability to be satisfied and content. And even then, I recognized that something was missing or that I had this tremendous pull to be doing something else, which is a little bit of a different thing. And there was still no shortcut to getting to there. And I just want to offer, so you can come from a place of like a loud explosion, like cancer and in training with young children, or you can come from a place where you've done all that and you've made it to the other side. And I had literally what I think most people would want as a practice, but it wasn't a fit. And I see this a lot with people I work with. I should be happy. I should be grateful. This is what I wanted or what I thought I wanted. And I might even say it probably is what you wanted. And then you changed. And then you had a capacity for something different. So there's two different ways here of recognizing that something is out of alignment.
So speaking of alignment, we're going to invite you to a little micro practice. So this week, notice a moment where you're simply continuing something because you were scheduled to do so, or someone was expecting you to do so, or you were expecting yourself to do so, rather than choosing it. So just notice when that comes up. And it could be any number of tasks, meetings, obligations. Inviting you to ask yourself, if I were building this life on purpose, would this be in it?
I love it. The other way to ask this question, which I found really helpful, it's not really a question, was to wake up and choose to be married to the person you're married to that day, right? We take it as kind of a default. Well, I committed to this, so I'm here. But you're actually making an active choice not to get divorced, not to end your marriage, not to do something else. And it's actually a really powerful mind shift. I also did some work around this. I was choosing to go to work each day. And I know so many people say to me, well, I have to or I need to. And I'm like, nope, you're choosing it because you could not go, right? They would not pay you and they would fire you, but you're still choosing it. And you can choose to do something else or choose to make a transition plan. But while you're going, you're choosing and you feel much more empowered and much more energized. And I would offer that if you really feel that you can't choose it, there's a big clue there. So I got this question actually last night. We'd already planned to record this podcast, but it's funny. I was out at a storytelling event in the Redwoods. And for any of you who've not been to storytelling, we might have to do a podcast on this. It's my new love. I love it. It's fascinating. I would love to become a storyteller. A TED Talk is a little bit of a storyteller, but it's this creative outlet that people do that's really cool. But I went with a new friend. I have been working on making new friends. And this is actually the parent of one of my kids' friends in college. And we realized at a parents' dinner, that we lived right near each other. So we've been saying we were going to get together. So I invited her to the storytelling event and with her husband, and I brought my husband. And part of her incentive in wanting to go there is that her daughter's actually getting married in this Redwood Grove a year from now. So she wanted to check out what it looked like at night. She asked me there about my journey of getting to where I am now, because she knows that we recently moved here and that we did it around the time our son went to college. And her child, who's my child's friend, both of us landed in empty nesthood with our children leaving. And so she said, well, when you left your practice, you mean you just jumped? You just decided that you were going to do something different. You just did it. And I was like, yeah, no, I did. I really just jumped. And I get this question all the time. What do you mean? Well, how do you prepare and how do you set yourself up? And I shared with her what I'm going to share her now, which is even if I had had a plan, which I didn't really, I had some backup plans. COVID came and every backup plan that I had disappeared. And so I was jumping regardless. And anytime you make a big decision and you change things up, you are kind of jumping into cold water. But when you jump into the cold water of the lake, it feels really good eventually, unless it's ice cold, right? And so it's that jumping in part, that's the scary part. There's no shortcut. You can't bypass that to get the amazing feeling of floating or swimming in the lake or the ocean or the pool on a hot day. So I do think we can jump, but we can also jump with a life preserver. And I feel like that's how I set myself up to jump. And that is the part that's not the shortcut, right? So you don't want to jump without a life preserver and drown. So can you set yourself up well with tools? And what might those tools look like? For me, they were coaching, they were mindfulness, they were community, they were health. I took a lot of good care of my health at that moment. And I see for a lot of people that that's a key piece to being able to live your fullest life, is making sure you take care of the physical body that's going along with you. And if you decide that you don't need these things and you can just plow through, that's that old patterning, but you probably need them. There's also a trust. And so there is this quote in my favorite Shauna Shapiro book, Good Morning, I Love You, about when you fall, who you become will catch you. It's not her quote. I can't remember it. And I even asked the computer to try to figure out who said it, and they couldn't find it. But it sticks with me in that version, that the person you become will catch you if you were to fall. And what I think about that is to recognize that that is true. You can catch yourself if you are taking good care of yourself and you have your own back. You can also decide not to catch yourself and you'll fall. And so recognizing the personal investment, and that's the no shortcut, right? It's taking good care of yourself and being strategic and thoughtful as you move forward into becoming.
So my tools and my net, if you will, when I involuntarily fell, I'm going to say I
You were
fell.
pushed off the
I was
diving board.
like for the cliff, yeah, through cancer. What was the safety net was a very intentional mindfulness practice that was cultivated out of necessity. And interestingly, I had been born and raised Buddhist, but it was having had cancer that really made me establish a formal mindfulness practice and the integration of mindfulness into a core day-to-day existence, really. The other aspect that was later on, it came because I wasn't frankly strong enough to engage in any of these sports right off the bat after my acute cancer treatment, is now the gratitude that I have for being able to still play volleyball, because I was a avid volleyball player before cancer. I also had paddled a bit before cancer, including dragon boat paddling, but not very seriously. But now after cancer, I'm part of Team Survivor San Diego Sea Dragons for the last 7+ years, having been the outgoing, most recent co-captain. And then more recently, allowing myself the time and space to explore indoor rock climbing. So I'm now top rope belay certified. And in fact, right before this practice, Jessie, I was indoor rock climbing with dear friend and also physician, Dr. Regina Troxel, who is my belay partner. And we're scaling like 30 to 60 feet walls, basically, of different magnitudes in difficulty. And we're always leveling up. So there's a lot of mental and physical lessons I'm learning along the way through these activities. And then you also mentioned physical health, and I'm going to definitely include the mental health aspect of this. So not only was I healing physically from cancer survivorship and navigating different aspects of grief with quote unquote my new body after surviving cancer, from surgeries, from losing upper extremity strength, and the way that chemo can age your body biologically. There was grief involved with that process, not just for myself, but also with my children and all of the different phases of life that they're going through as they grow into their own people, and how that's differing from what I thought would be. So some grief involved there. But really just big shout out to my mental health care team, my multiple therapists, and my psychiatrist, understanding that in the retrospective, I had untreated childhood OCD growing up in a family that endured a lot of childhood emotional neglect, and healing from that. And then having a really bad flare of the OCD in the postpartum period, having postpartum OCD and navigating that, being a mom of two, because the postpartum OCD came with my after diagnosis baby. So processing through therapy, doing internal family systems type therapy, also navigating the grief associated with that as well. So like this whole accumulation of experience, like failures and successes, yes, but a whole lot of it actually was everything in between, was this not shortcut way of living. It was quite messy, but I learned a lot. And I've made the commitment to basically see the world and my life with as much clarity as possible, and mindfulness allows me to do that. Granted, I mean, the cumulative life experience that we all have inevitably somewhat changes the shape of our lens. It can cloud our lenses sometimes, but through mindfulness and intention, I can try to keep those lenses clean and truth seeking, while at the same time, first and foremost, keeping my mind, body, and spirit healthy.
For the everything in between, there's no shortcuts to the everything in between. So I think in reflecting on this idea of no shortcuts, consider what is yours, what's in your control about the process. Part of it, the time bit and the luck bit, that's not in your control. And so that came into play with whatever happened to you and whatever happened to me. And it's going to come into play when you dive into this big life that you want to live, or the most full life, or however you want to frame it. That belongs, I would say, to the universe, however you want to think about it, a higher power. But we do have control over the space we're in. And what I mean by that is physically the space we put ourselves in. We just talked about that in the curiosity episode recently, but also the choices you make, what you choose to do, what you choose not to do, what you choose to say, what you choose not to say. I would say what you choose to eat or not eat, and the decisions you make about what you say yes to and what you say no to. And so all of that is in your control. And those are all the little layers of the not shortcutting thing. It takes a lot of decisions, and it takes a lot of commitment, and it takes a lot of vulnerability and discomfort. The other piece that's in your control that you cannot shortcut is the state of mind that you bring to your life. And we've talked a lot about that. And so you can show up mindfully, you can show up reacting, you can show up judging, or you can show up with non-judgment. We talk about a lot of the tenets of mindfulness here. You can choose to show up mindfully with patience, or you can choose to show up urgent, unmindfully. And so you can choose the state of mind, your thoughts and your feelings about everything that shows up, and those influence how you show up. And so all of that's in your control. And we so often think that it's not, and we focus on the luck or the fate, or we give ourselves too much power and say it's all in our control, and therefore it's our fault. And there was a big mistake, and therefore we shouldn't take any risks in the future. So the invitation here is to be intentional about what you can have control over, and be intentional about what you can do to set yourself up for success.
All of you have already lived a big, beautiful life. In some way, shape, or form, you have already lived through a lot. And I want to invite you to celebrate the you that you are today. The person that you have become may have been exactly the person that you needed when you were a child growing up, or when you were hurt. And perhaps the person that you become in the future will continue to do that. There's a lot of healing that can be done through living a life well lived.
And that we are ever evolving. So the person that you have become is not the person you'll be 5 years or 10 years from now. Adults are continuing to change just like children. And adding in this idea that once you've had experiences that teach you how to be mindful, intentional, noticing the beauty of things, your experience of life becomes that much more those things. You turn your lens to seeing the beauty, celebrating where you've come, and that becomes that strengths-based learning. And it's also why retreats and mindfulness are so helpful, because they train your lens of vision and your lens of noticing and awareness.
So join Jessie and me for the Connect in Nature retreat. We will be helping to clean our lenses, the way that we view life. We will be experientially practicing tons of mindfulness in different settings, doing and not doing different things.
And to add this idea that even if you have a mindfulness practice, and even if you feel like you're good at this, we all have to clean our lenses. It's just like your glasses. They get dirty after a while. And taking these intermittent moments to pause and reset and get out your lens cleaner and the wiper and clean things off, the world looks very different with clean lenses.
So you don't need permission to live your biggest, most beautiful life. Do it today. Do it now.
One more truth about this whole process, now that we've invited you to do it today and do it now, but to recognize that there is something called, we often talk about anticipatory anxiety, but there's also expansion anxiety or growth anxiety. And that when you decide to live into this biggest, most beautiful life, you might wonder if you've lost your mind, or you feel untethered or unmoored, or you're not sure what's happening. And this is the phase where the old you is different than the new you, but you're in that liminal space, the space in between. And so potentially your awareness is aware that there's something else out there, but you haven't caught up with it. So it's not that you've lost your mind and there's something wrong with you. It's literally just that you're growing. And when you grow and do something, it's scary. Just like when a kid gets up and learns to walk, right? It's a different space and a different vision of lens of how one moves through the world. We talk about it a bit when kids are also becoming independent, right? They go out and they come back, and they go out and they come back, and they become overwhelmed, and they have sleep regression. It's a very well-known fact for pediatricians. Well, we have regression. It just looks different as adults. It might be like sleep regression in that there's anxiety and you're not sleeping. It's part of the experience. And there's no other way through than to experience it. And each step you take, the anxiety gets quieter and it gets quieter, and then it gets quieter. And so ultimately, it just takes time and it takes practice and recognizing that nothing is wrong with you. I remember the day that I turned in my resignation, and I have never felt more sick and more overwhelmed. Even after I did it, some people say, oh, I feel so relieved. And I was like, I don't feel relieved. But it was really this, because I had now made a commitment to dive into this idea that I had, and this belief that I had, and this mission that I had. And that's terrifying. So like, of course I was freaked out. Well, it would have been unreasonable to expect something different. And yet my brain also screamed that meant I had done something wrong. Mm-hmm. It didn't last long. Well, off and on, right? It fades over time. It would pop up every once in a while, like, are you sure you know what you're doing? Like questioning yourself. But it wasn't the same sort of screaming and brain freaking out. And that's what our brains do. They're trained to do that. They're trained to keep us where we are. And so if you want to live a big life, there's no way around the brain moments where you feel untethered and unsteady. I actually have written a few blogs about this, and the idea that like when you feel untethered or off or unsettled, it actually means that you're growing and changing and shifting. And so you don't need to be upset about it. It's just that something great's about to happen.
So thinking about like the committees that you are part of, boards, like board of directors, for instance, volunteer work, anything that consumes your time, sometimes there can be an innate knowing of this misalignment, and that's you expanding. And it reminds us of the episode where when we quit different activities, it was actually a way of graduating, that we were outgrowing some of these opportunities. And it was the chance for us to free up some time and space for ourselves for something different, and also to free up that position for someone to grow into.
So one other thing that is in your control is how you react and respond to all the things that are happening in this transition, or the making choices to live into your biggest, most beautiful life, your life well lived. And so I like to think of it as a wild card. but it's a wild card that doesn't have to be a wild card. Most of us think it's a wild card, and it is the tone and energy that you're going to choose to bring to it. And choosing how you're going to show up for it, and specifically the tone and energy, the approach. I often talk about how the approach determines your landing. You choose that approach, and that can steady you. It can be your life preserver. It can minimize the bumps. And I want to invite this idea that every person who's built something beautiful could very likely not have planned for the full enormity of it. What comes to mind is the iPhone. Like, could you possibly have imagined when you had this idea and you built something that it would change the world in the way that it has? No, is the answer. So when you're living this big, beautiful life, you can't envision the possibilities in your relationships and the possibilities of change and contributions that you might make. And I think that's been true of my journey with pause and presence. And what people can recognize and plan for is how you show up, so that you can steady yourself around the bumps and the wobbles and the wins and the mistakes. That is in your control.
You can give yourself permission to let go of the idea that the struggle is proof of your worth, of your strength. The struggle is simply the struggle, and it may or may not be necessary, but oftentimes it is necessary for that life well lived.
Yeah. And you can let the parts that are easy be easy.
Exactly.
The recognition that you are uncomfortable where you are is also incredibly important, because we are potentially comfortably uncomfortable where we are, but getting somewhere new is going to be uncomfortable. Most of us let that stop us in our tracks. There's no shortcut. But where you are, there's no shortcut to being miserable where you are either. And so leaning into change and moving through that discomfort actually gets you to the life well lived.
I am a woman who is in a male dominated specialty. I'm also an Asian American and an immigrant. And I know very, very well right now, in this moment in time, that there's a lot in this country and the world that I cannot change on multiple levels.
Yes.
So I, however, can choose to focus on what is within my control, what I can impact, parts of the external circumstances that I can influence and that I want to influence. So for me right now, it's really focusing on my family and my own health.
And that is literally the secret to a life well lived, focusing on where you can have impact and having impact in those places that matter most to you.
As always, we like to close our episodes with some reflection questions. If you were building your life on purpose starting today, what stays and what goes?
Where are you taking shortcuts to a life that looks big, but doesn't feel like yours?
What life preservers do you already have, and what do you still need before you jump?
Where is your mind screaming? And what is that telling you about where you're going and maybe how you're growing?
What would it feel like to stop using struggle as proof of your strength? So there are no shortcuts to a big life. Please send this episode to a friend, a colleague, a family member who looks successful on paper, who has everything on paper, but you know that there is something that's missing in their life that could potentially be filled with that missing thing so that they can be happy. And perhaps the colleague that is quietly asking, now what, after a life-altering season.
If you haven't heard the podcast episode with Enya Oakes, highly recommend going back to episode 261 and taking a listen. And if this podcast resonated and you are perhaps in the season where you want to lean into living your biggest, most beautiful life, or you're in the liminal space where your old life is not fitting and you haven't figured out where that new life is going to take you, coaching, yoga, listening to this podcast, joining us for a retreat, they actually will help. And to remind you that consuming and listening is one thing, and engaging in the work and being in the trees and practicing mindfulness and working with someone one-on-one or in a small group makes a huge difference. We thank you so, so much for listening. Please share the podcast with others who might enjoy it. Please leave us stars and reviews. And please join us for something bigger, something more beautiful, something fun to support yourself towards a life well lived.
Thanks for listening. If our message resonates, we'd love to connect further. Join us for coaching, mindfulness experiences, workshops, and retreats. Invite us to speak at your institution or conference. When you work with us, you don't just consume information, you create real change. Find Ni-Cheng Liang at Awakened Breath and Jessie Mahoney at Pause and Presence. Welcome to this mindful moment offering, inviting you to close eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you if it's safe for you to do so. Inviting you to notice a point of contact between your body and the supporting environment, like the ground beneath your feet and whatever you happen to be sitting or laying on. Next, inviting you to notice your breath at your nostrils, noticing the in-breath, noticing the out-breath, noticing the pause in between. Not trying to change the breath, but simply observing it just as it is, coming and going. Coming back to this breath. Noticing this breath. And as thoughts, body sensations, or other emotions capture your attention, you can come back to noticing the breath. Right now. Inviting you to take moments of intentional pause to simply observe what's happening and also to simply observe your breath, simply noticing it as an anchor of attention back to this present moment. As you're ready, blinking open eyes, letting the light back in. Thank you so much for practicing with me today.